Pushing Back the Shadows, support and awareness for mental health. Hello and welcome to episode 26 of the Pushing Back the Shadows podcast. So my name's Alex Davis. I'm the founder and main author behind Pushing Back the Shadows. So today I'd like to start a little bit of a series, and it's something that I've had kind of in the pipeline for the past, certainly the past couple of months, but haven't actually got around to doing. And it's a little bit of my journey. Now, those of you who listen to the podcast regularly will have heard that I do a lot of kind of encouragement. I do a lot of friends and family podcasts, how-tos, those sorts of things. But I haven't really tapped into my journey. So over the next 5 episodes, I'm going to look at my depression and some of the different things that I use to cope with it, some of the different ways that it affects me, and some of the different aspects and forms that I feel that it takes. So hopefully you'll stick with me over those couple of episodes. So this one is going to be the first in the series, and I've called it Depression the Liar. Now, it does, doesn't it? It really, really tells us lots and lots and lots of lies. It's something that that I've been talking a little bit with my 3-year-old, because we get, and I'm sure parents will have heard this struggle before, you get that moment when you hear something or you see they're doing something and you say, "What are you doing?" Nothing. Well, obviously you're doing something. What are you doing? Nothing. It wasn't me. Well, who else was it? You know, that sort of conversation where you know full stop that they're doing something, but they decide that they're going to try and hide the truth a little bit. Now, granted, with toddlers and children, that's kind of to get themselves out of trouble, but it's something that is still a lie. For whatever reason, it is still a lie. And depression itself is certainly a liar. It's a conversation I have with a lot of people on social media about some of the lies that their depression tells them. Lies such as, "I'm not good enough. I'll never amount to anything. The things I do aren't that special." Do any of those sound familiar? Because I'm certain that some of them will be ones that you'll have told yourself. And when I say you, I do mean the depression or the bipolar or whatever mental health issue you struggle with. But those are lies that we do tell ourselves, that we're not good enough, that we'll never amount to anything, that no matter how much we've put into a particular task or job, it's never going to be good enough. And it's horrible, really. It's horrible having to go through those thoughts day in, day out, that you're not good enough, that you haven't done the best that you could have, even though you've tried your best. One of the examples that I can give is, it was in last week's episode where I talked about the imposter syndrome and feeling like we are a fraud. I used to work in a bank on the phones, as I've told you guys a number of times, and it didn't matter how well I handled the call. It didn't matter how satisfied the customer was with their experience. None of it mattered. I still said, "I'm not good enough. I'm not very good at the job." And I told you last week that one of my colleagues used to say, you're great at this. You handle it far better than some of the people who've been here for years. And yet I had a hard time believing it. Why? Because I've never put much value on myself. And I'm not saying that to get any kind of sympathy or get people turning around saying, "Oh no, you're great at this, you're great at that, you're great at that." The simple truth is that this is how my depression affects me. Now, it's important to make a distinction at this point where a lot of people do say they're not good enough. They struggle with kind of a lower self-esteem. That is not necessarily depression. It's a very fine line between a low self-esteem and depression itself. And a lot of experts will say when these kinds of thoughts are lasting for weeks and weeks, maybe even months, that's when it starts to be kind of more along the side of depression. Or certainly when this kind of low self-esteem, lack of self-worth, combines itself with other symptoms like a persistent low mood, changes in your appetite, and other such symptoms. So I would say this is definitely my depression, because realistically there are enough of the other symptoms, and it's something that I do struggle with. Those almost uncontrollable thoughts of, suck it, you're not good enough. So let's explore that a little bit. Let me tell you a bit more about me and a bit more about my depression and how it is a liar.
You're listening to Pushing Back the Shadows.
So as I said, it makes me doubt some of the things that I've accomplished, that I've achieved, and it makes me doubt my own abilities. If you go on to www.pushingbacktheshadows.com, you'll find under my journey, one of the first things I did was I wrote a series called Inside My Head, and that looked at some of the different mental health issues that I struggle with, how they affect me, and some of the bits that really make up me and who I am. And I will link that in the description as well, so you can access that, have a look if you want to, a little bit more about my journey itself. But the first, at least I believe it was the first, because it's been a little while since I wrote this, was entitled Worry and Doubt. Now, worry is a separate issue, that just goes with anxiety, but doubt in itself, I find, is part of the depression. It's part of how the depression is a liar. Because it doesn't matter what I've done, what kind of feedback I've got, anything, it makes me doubt the accomplishment. It doesn't matter whether I've written a blog post, whether I've given a talk, done a podcast, helped somebody, whatever it is, it makes me doubt it. Do you find that? It's something that seems to be quite common. But not only does it make me doubt accomplishments, it also makes me doubt that anybody really cares. It's quite common again with depression for people to say, well, there's nobody who really cares. Nobody cares. And while to a certain extent that can be true, at the same time, it's not. Even the people who will take the time out of their busy day to help you, or will take time to sit with you and just listen, whatever it is that people do for you, your depression still turns around and says, yeah, they don't really care. Well, I say your depression, my depression, our depression, it's something that a lot of people have said they feel. Now, I look at my Facebook, and to put a bit of context into it, I grew up in the Czech Republic. So I spent kind of the first 7 years of my life in England, then the next 9 years in the Czech Republic, and then came back to England. I've also lived in France, and while I was in the Czech Republic, I went to an international school, so there were people from all over the world in that school. And so I've made a lot of, I say friends, really it's more acquaintances now because I'm awful at keeping in touch. But if you were to go on my Facebook, there's the best part of 950 people connected. It sounds great. And I look and I know that a lot of them I do keep in touch with. I do talk to them. But still, depression tells me that there's nobody there. that nobody really cares. And yes, as I say, in some cases that will be true. There are those people who will say, oh, no, depression, not getting involved with that. But at the same time, there are people who will say, look, if you need something, let me know. Talk to me. I will help. And it can be very, very hard to disprove that lie. Because even if people are saying, yes, I care, I do, I'm there for you, or even if they're not even saying it, they're doing it, you're still kind of having to interpret what they're saying, what they're doing, and believe it. And that's part of the hard part, because depression robs you of that belief. At least certainly it robs me of that belief. So it tells me that no one really cares. It tells me that I'm not worth anything. And the two go together very, very well, because really, if you feel like you're not worth anything, then why would people care? In today's society, where a lot of interactions seem to be based off what you can do for me and what I can get from this, why would people care if you're not really worth anything? Look at it for a moment from a business setting. If you're making the company money, if you're doing a good job, they keep you. If you're not, sometimes they try and retrain you. Other times, they just let you go. You're a budget deficit. And I think a lot of that does tend to seep into us as people. We look at our interactions, our day-to-day, and we think, well, if we're not doing as well as we should, why would people want us? And if we don't see the value in ourselves, then why would people want to spend time with us? Why would people care? And depression, given that it knows you so well, latches onto that, and it uses that. And that is one of the big problems that I find comes into my head when depression is telling me the lies. How then do I fight that? I mean, it's a mental illness. It's in my brain. And as I mentioned in one of the recent episodes, your brain is like a supercomputer. And if it's fighting against you, how do you fight back? How do you retrain it into thinking, actually, no, I'm not as bad as it says? I've got a few suggestions, and I'll go through them with you in just a second.
Pushing back the shadows, support and awareness for mental health.
So that supercomputer that is your brain has turned itself against you. It's telling you all these lies. It's saying you're not good enough, nobody cares, and nothing you ever do is going to amount to anything of any kind of importance. So what do? How do I cope with it? Because, see, that's the thing. I could sit here and I could tell you, this is how you cope with it, this is what you do, that is the way to get through this kind of problem. But what works for me doesn't necessarily work for others. And it's interesting because recently I've been having a bit of a debate with somebody on Twitter about this. She thinks after the whole Nicole Arbour video, that video that I did a little bit of a Twitter rant about it as well. Not something I do very often, mind you, but realistically it was something I felt I had to do. And this one person kind of agreed with that. She said, well, yeah, she knows what she's talking about. This is how you get out of depression. But the point that a lot of people miss is what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for others. So how do I fight it? And that's what I want to share, my experience, because who knows, some of you might benefit from it, some of you might not, some of you might only benefit from part of it. But how do I fight it? The first thing that I remember, and this is something that I've referred back to a lot over the past couple of weeks, is back in episode 17, I talk about the power of perspective, and that other people can sometimes see the good in us that we can't necessarily see ourselves. Do you find that? Sometimes people will tell you that you're doing a good job, and you think, well, no, I've done that absolutely abysmally. But they can see the worth. Back in that episode I mentioned about fraud, it surprised me when a manager actually requested me for her team, because I didn't think I'd done anything that worthwhile, but clearly she saw something in me that she wanted. Whether it was the way I handled the calls, whether it was my knowledge of how the business worked, whatever it was, there was something there that she wanted for her team. And sometimes I find that I have to actually take on board some of other people's perspectives and say, do you know what, maybe they've got a point. Because what do they gain from it? Why would they say that if it wasn't true? It's almost kind of taking that doubt and giving them the benefit of the doubt. Coupled with that, I try and be a little bit nicer to myself. I try and find something in me, that I can use as a compliment. Even if it's something stupid like, oh, you've got a great face for podcasting. Yeah, not that I've said that before. But even something like that, where I'm trying to find a positive in me. And note that this is separate to positive thinking, because I do not believe positive thinking works. You cannot just think positively and positive your way out of depression, because I really don't think that works. But finding something good that you've done, that you've said, that you have about you, to actually compliment yourself on. That's one of the other things I do. But recently there's been something that I've found to be far more effective. And I'd like you to try it with me, if that's alright. So, think of some of the things that you've said to yourself. Some of the things that you really find it quite harsh. Like, you're no good. You're worthless. Some people might say you're fat, you're ugly. Whatever it may be, those are just examples. But think of those things for a second. And then, I don't know where you are when you listen to this, but if there are people around you, look at some of them. If you've got children, imagine your child. Imagine your best friend. Imagine one of your parents. Somebody that you really get on with. And try saying it to them. It's hard, isn't it? It's something that we find we can't do. We can't bring ourselves to say those things to them. So, if we wouldn't say it to our child, to our friend, to our parent, whoever it is, why should we say it to ourselves? Why should we say it to ourselves? There's that kind of age-old phrase, do to others what you would have them do to you. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Well, how about we turn that on its head? Why don't we treat ourselves the way we would want to treat others? Why don't we treat ourselves the way we would treat others? In today's world, a lot of emphasis is placed on how selfish people can be, how there's that unwillingness to do anything unless you're getting something out of it, that quid pro quo kind of attitude. But I find that really, when it comes to things like self-esteem, there are a lot of people out there who would be so nice and so kind to other people, and yet when they get home they rip themselves to shreds. So why not try that? If you wouldn't say it to somebody else, don't say it to yourself. It's something that works, albeit not all the time, but it works for me. So those are kind of the three things that I use to fight the liar of depression. I try and be nicer to myself. I try and find some of the positive things in myself. I take on other people's perspectives. And I think, would I say this to somebody else? Would I say this to somebody else? So next week, I'm going to be looking at depression, the comforter, because as odd as it might sound, there can be something very comforting with depression. Intrigued? Well, that's good. I'll see you next week, and I will explore that, and I'll tell you a bit more about me and my depression. Hopefully, guys, you have a great week. I look forward to hearing from you guys on Twitter, on Facebook. I do love talking to some of you guys. Also, just a quick shout out to our patrons. So that's Shirley, Louise, Katie, Luce, Sam, Cheryl, Yi, Tamira, and Alex. Thank you ever so much for your support. Those are just a few of our patrons, and they're the ones who get the shout out in the video. So thank you ever so much for supporting us, helping us continue the work that we do. It is greatly, greatly appreciated. Well, that is all from me for today, so I shall catch you next week on the Pushing Back the Shadows podcast. Take care, guys. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Pushing Back the Shadows. To find out more, head over to pushingbacktheshadows.com and hit subscribe to get all of our latest updates straight to your inbox. Alternatively, connect with us on Facebook, which is facebook.com/AlexDavisPBTS, or you can visit us on Twitter at AlexDavisPBTS. Enable Pushing Back the Shadows to continue supporting people in the mental health community, their friends and their family. By pledging just $1 a month, you could help us to continue supporting people with depression, with anxiety, with bipolar and other mental illnesses. You can also unlock exclusive rewards, behind the scenes, sneak previews of upcoming posts and much, much more. So head over to www.patreon.com/AlexDavisPBTS to find out more.